I am Laura Dixon, and you are listening to the Naturally Thin for Life podcast, episode number 130, Release Emotional Hunger. Welcome to the Naturally Thin for Life podcast. I'm going to teach you how to get out of your diet brain so that you too can be naturally thin for life. No counting, restricting, or obsessing. I am going to take the mystery out of it for you so that you can become naturally thin starting today. Are you ready? Let's do this. All right, friends, welcome back to the podcast. Last week, you heard me talk about befriending hunger and how to really understand very objectively what your hunger feels like in your body as a cue from your body and as a hormonal release, and how to understand different levels of hunger. Like, what does a hunger of a 3 versus a 5 versus a 7 versus a 9 feel like? And I do use a hunger scale of 1 to 10 just to give your brain something to kind of like think about in different levels. And today we're going to really distinguish between physical hunger and emotional hunger so that you can spot it and then release it. And if you didn't listen to the podcast episode last week, make sure to go back and listen to that episode, because once you know what your true physical hunger feels like very objectively, it will be so much easier to spot any emotional hunger. And before we dive in, if you're loving the podcast and getting a lot out of it, please take a minute to write a review and leave a review. That helps other women find the podcast so that they too can have the freedom of being naturally thin for the rest of their life, so that we all can go on and use that mental energy and effort to go after other dreams and goals. So emotional hunger is that desire to eat, that pull to eat, that kind of urgency to eat when you're not actually hungry, or when you're not at the hunger level you want to be at. Like if you notice a tinge of hunger and then all of a sudden it's like an emergency and you have to eat right now, that's emotional hunger. And you may even have a slight sense of emotional hunger when you are physically hungry, but there isn't an urgency to true physical hunger. There isn't this is a serious problem, I have to solve it right now, when you have a calm, friendly relationship with hunger. So one of the best ways that I like to spot emotional hunger, especially when you're just kind of learning the difference in your own body, is to know if there's an urgency to it. Like, does it have a strong pull, a strong urgency, like vibrating in your body? So for me, when I have an urgency to eat, it feels like an outward pull in my chest. It feels like a rope connected to my chest, kind of pulling me towards the food. And if you aren't hungry, what you want to understand is what is there instead. What is that emotion there? Because if it's not physical hunger, it's emotional hunger, always. And again, the point of loving your hunger, befriending your hunger, releasing yourself from emotional hunger is to feel more in control, is to feel so much more alive and vibrant and energized in your body. And when you can distinguish between physical hunger and emotional hunger, friends, it is like the biggest game changer. It is how you will feel so in control of your food, your emotional well-being. It's how you release yourself from that constant kind of like tense and tightness that so many of us feel. And so if you aren't hungry, it is always an emotion that's driving you to eat. Always, 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 always. And even the answer to hunger is an emotion driving you to eat. It's the desire to eat. But what you want when you think about your hunger and the emotions that you associate with hunger is like a calm, friendly, loving desire to eat when you're hungry, rather than an urgency, stressed out, jittery, or super excited or flighty or like jazzed up feeling in your body. And for many of us, because we've never learned this before, a lot of times we can commingle and think of our emotions and hunger like intertwined. They're completely different, but they do have some similarities. So, for example, both emotions and your hunger can come and go in waves and vary in intensity. And a lot of times for us, when we feel hunger and when we feel our emotions, they are in a similar place in our body. So a lot of us feel emotions in our chest and our stomach and maybe sometimes in our shoulders and kind of down to our fingertips and kind of up through our neck and maybe slightly in our head a little bit. And that's a lot of times where we feel hunger as well. And so even though they can both come and go in waves and they may be in similar spots in our body, they feel very, very different. And so that's why it's so important that you take what I taught you in the last episode, befriending hunger, to really understand just what your hunger feels like very objectively. And so here's what you're going to do. You're going to understand what your hunger feels like. And then if it isn't that, then you know it's an emotion. And when you spot that and you know, oh, the only reason I want to eat right now, the only reason I have the desire to eat right now, the urge to eat right now, that like pull towards the food right now is because of a feeling in my body. And I'm going to teach you in this episode how to release yourself from that. And the reason so many of us eat when we're not hungry and we eat from emotional hunger is because our brain has learned, and we've sort of taught it that a lot of times unbeknownst to us through dieting or how we grew up or just in our society, we've learned, there's this feeling in my body. I don't like it. I need a distraction, and food, our brain is like, food is a great distraction. And so it goes and it finds food to try to distract us from either urgency or panic or stress or anxiety or even excited or restlessness or overwhelmed, right? There's a plethora of emotions that our brains think are a problem that we then use food to distract ourselves from. And when you have emotional hunger, it is never satisfied. It might be like slightly satisfied. There might be a tinge of relief, but there is no long-term satisfaction. And so sometimes you will know if you answered emotional hunger because of how you feel afterwards. And how you feel, meaning how you feel emotionally, where you don't just feel like calm and satisfied and like move on to the next thing, where you feel a little bit uncomfortable physically because you probably overate, but you also feel a little bit of like regret and like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have eaten that. Or maybe you're like, and I need to eat some more, right? Because remember, emotional hunger is never, ever satisfied. And so when you are really honest with yourself, and that is really the key to all of this, is to just let yourself be honest with yourself. Is this true physical hunger or is this emotional hunger? That's a question I want you to ask yourself. And when you answer that question very honestly, it will sound very like calm when you answer that. Like, oh, this is physical hunger. And if your answer to that question is something that's like, no, it's not emotional hunger. If it's anything that's like hyped up or really loud or really energized, that typically is a good indicator that your brain is kind of lying to you. And like, listen, this is not like a judgment on any of your brains. My brain lies to me too. And so our brains are like really good at wanting to just keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, even though it may not serve us. So sometimes like our brains are not always truth tellers. And so you want to remember that. And it's something I consciously remember for myself. It's like my brain is not necessarily a truth teller right now. But I always know when it is and when I'm being really honest with myself because it's very like calm inner wisdom. And so I want you to ask yourself, now that you know what hunger feels like for you objectively, when you have the desire to eat, you ask yourself, is this true physical hunger? Or is this emotional hunger? And if it is true physical hunger, is it a physical hunger I want to answer? The answer is not always yes to that. I may feel physical hunger of a 3 or a 5 or a 7, and maybe I decided, well, I want to eat today when I'm at a physical hunger level of an 8 or a 9, right? So just because I feel physical hunger of a 3 doesn't necessarily mean I need to answer that or that I even want to answer that. Ironically, before I started recording this episode, I exercised this morning. And usually when I exercise, sometimes my hunger comes in a little stronger, sometimes not so much. It kind of just depends. And I'm just waiting for that optimal hunger level. And it's not really something that's on my mind ever until like the optimal hunger level lands. And so I was like, I'm going to record this podcast episode. I'm feeling pretty hungry, but I'm just going to do this podcast episode and then I will eat afterwards. And I started recording this episode and I like could not concentrate. So it's not what you're hearing now. It was me rambling and jumbling, even though I have like what I want to say in front of you in an outline. It was like my brain like could not concentrate. And so that to me is always a very strong sign that I have kind of gone too far in how hungry I want to be. It's a very objective, neutral way. I wasn't like freaked out about it or urgent about eating. I was just like, oh, I'm really hungry right now. I'm just going to go eat first, and then I'm going to come back and record this podcast episode for you. So knowing your physical hunger versus your emotional hunger is so important so that you can spot it and then release yourself from it. And so if it isn't physical hunger, then I want you to ask yourself, okay, well, what would it be? What emotion would it be? And actually name a feeling. We feel feelings in our body. I want you to actually name it. And if you don't know a lot of feeling words, I knew about 10, happy, sad, grateful, joy, angry, those sort of feelings. That was like about the extent of my feeling vocabulary. And so if you don't know a lot of feelings, when you join Naturally Thin for Life, you get an expansive feeling list as part of your workbook, but I would suggest you go to Google and find some feelings. I use the word hippo. I don't know why. I just like it. But go find some feelings so that you can really just name emotions in your body so that you develop this skill. And the point of this and everything I teach you today is not to get it right, but to know the difference between emotional hunger and true physical hunger so that you have a calm, loving relationship with hunger. You will have a relationship with hunger forever. You already do have a relationship with hunger. Why not have a relationship with hunger that is calm and loving? Because you're going to have it until you die. And your body wants to help you reach your naturally thin weight. Your body wants you to feel amazing. And hunger is a great way, a great tool to help you get there. And if you remember from Jana's story, she shared that this emotional piece was the thing that was missing for her. And it is the thing that's missing from almost everyone that joins the Naturally Thin for Life program. They tell me time and time again, it's hunger and it's the emotional piece and it's the workbook. And those three things make it inevitable for them to reach their naturally thin weight. So I taught you how to befriend hunger last week. This week, you're going to release emotional hunger. And next week, you are going to fall in love with hunger. And of course, again, I want to say these podcast episodes about hunger are not for anyone that actually struggles with hunger in the sense that they don't have access to food and that they're going hungry. Of course not. This episode and these episodes are for those of us that have financial and physical access to food and it's readily available to us. And for those of you that want to honor your hunger, listen to your hunger, and use your hunger as the fastest way to the mental freedom and the physical freedom of being naturally thin. So you're going to ask yourself that question. Is this true physical hunger or is this emotional hunger? And then I want you to know and be able to name specifically what are your emotional hunger emotions. A lot of times we eat as a response, like a habitual response to particular emotions. So for many people, it's urgent, panic, permissive, justified, anxious, stressed. So all that's happened is we feel a vibration in our body, an emotion, a feeling in our nervous system. And our brain has learned that that emotion is a problem and it needs to solve it. And we've turned to food and we've turned to eating. And so then it just becomes a habitual response that we feel a particular emotion and our brain is like, oh, what we do is eat. It just becomes a genuine habitual response that we've never questioned before. And so what you're doing when you're releasing emotional hunger is you are teaching yourself to not answer any feelings with food, to not need to escape any emotion with food, so that you only think about food when you're truly physically hungry and at your optimal physical hunger level. So I never think about food when I'm in a physical hunger of a 3 or a 5. It just isn't even anything that crosses my mind. Once I reach physical hunger of like a 7 or an 8, it's like my brain's like, oh, okay, like we're starting to get to be pretty hungry. Like we're probably going to eat soon. And that's it. And then I go and I eat, and then I stop when I'm satisfied and I move on. And I don't think about food at any other time than those times. And it's complete freedom. And so that's what I want for you too. And so like I said earlier, one of the best ways to know if it is emotional hunger and not true physical hunger is if there's a really intense urgency to it. Now, there may be true physical hunger, but what you want to do is release yourself from any urgency first. Because when you start eating when you're hungry, but you're answering that hunger with like an intense urgency, it's really hard to stop eating when you're satisfied. So when you have that urgent feeling in your body, your brain is like, this is a problem. It needs to be solved right now. instead of truly befriending hunger and like calmly answering that hunger. So if you experience urgency to eat when you're hungry or when you're not hungry, what I want you to do is this. I'm going to walk you through how it feels for me, but I want you to really just ask yourself some questions and know, how does this urgent feeling, how does this urgent emotion vibrate in my body? And you can replace urgent with panic or anxiety or excited or bored or stressed or I don't know, whatever other emotion, right? You can put any emotion there ask yourself these questions that I'm going to share with you and really understand how that emotion vibrates in your body. So for me, urgent feels like a fast, rapid vibration in my chest. If you think about like the signals and the waves on a heart rate monitor, for me, urgent is like very high up and downs and very rapid. So like not much between the up and downs. It's just like up and down very rapidly. And if I had to give it a color, it would be a bright orange color. And the energy of urgent, it feels like it's an energy very strongly coming out of my chest. It feels like a rope is pulling me up and off my chair. And the texture of it is like a liquidy texture that morphs into very tight strings like a guitar or a harp, like the strings on those instruments. And as I bring my attention and my awareness to it in the way I just described to you, those strings that are quickly vibrating and rapidly vibrating, they start to slow down and they start to drop and they actually start to melt away. And that's the releasing of the urgency. And how you do this is you're bringing your attention and your awareness to the vibration of urgency itself. And the point of this, again, isn't to get it right. The point of this is to teach your brain, I have an emotion, a feeling of urgency in my body right now. And you describe it very neutrally, very objectively. And what happens is your brain is like, oh, this is not actually a feeling that I need to solve for right now. And so what your brain learns is, oh, this is urgent. Feels like a rapid, fast vibration in my chest, really high frequency, up and down, waves on a heart rate monitor. It's bright orange, like an energy pulling out of my chest. And it feels like tense, tight guitar strings. And as I sit here with it, I can feel those guitar strings, and I notice that those guitar strings start to slow and drop and melt away. And as I describe that to you, I can actually feel that vibration in my body kind of coming and going. And when you do this, what your brain learns is, oh, this is simply a vibration in my body. It doesn't actually have any control over me. It's not actually something I need to answer right now. It's just a vibration in my body. You will feel almost immediate calmness and peacefulness as you do this. You do this a few times and your brain learns very quickly, oh, this emotion of urgency, not a problem I need to solve for right now. So even if you are hungry and you're feeling urgent, I want you to really get to know your urgent vibration in your body first by asking yourself some of these questions like, where do I feel it? What is the texture like? What is the color like? Does it move? How would I describe it to a little kid? You want your description of your emotion to be very neutral and objective. Because if it's neutral and objective, your brain isn't like, oh no, this is a problem. It just, your brain learns this is neutral and objective. And you can watch that emotion kind of melt and start to fade away in your body. And after you do this a few times, what happens is your brain learns particular emotions. So my brain is now like, oh, this is urgency. And so I don't need to every time ask myself these questions and like come into my body and understand how it's vibrating. I literally will say the words out loud. Oh, this is urgency. And I feel an immediate like exhale release, because when you aren't releasing yourself from this emotion by doing this practice and implementing this, what happens is your brain is then like fighting it and resisting it with the thought or a version of this thought process of like, uh-oh, this is a problem. Uh-oh, this is a problem. Uh-oh, this is a problem. And what happens is the urgency, it like builds and builds and builds and builds and builds to the point where feels very out of control. And then a lot of times we eat in a way that's out of control. This is why people fear hunger, is because they have an urgent relationship with it that they fight and fight and fight against, that it then builds up to a certain point where they literally eat out of control. And then they think, well, the hunger made me eat out of control, but that's not it at all. It's the emotional piece. Always, always, always. So I want you to take a minute to do this and practice this for yourself. Anytime you feel urgent, anytime you feel that desire to eat, I want you to ask yourself, is this true physical hunger? And if it's anything other than a calm, loving feeling in your body, then I want you to ask yourself, what is that emotion? And then let me just understand how that emotion is vibrating in my body. And what happens when you do this is you stop going back and forth in your brain. You stop being like, well, am I hungry? Am I not hungry? Should I eat something? I want to eat something, but I'm not that hungry. Maybe I'm bored. And then you like work for a few minutes and then you're like, man, maybe I want a distraction and I'm bored again. And now I like have a lot to do and now I'm feeling pressure and now I'm feeling overwhelmed, right? And you're like, I don't want to do that. And then you're feeling dread, right? So when you have this relationship with hunger where you know how to release emotional hunger, you stop all of that negotiating in your mind. Releasing yourself from emotional hunger is like a time creator. You will have so much more time, both mentally and like actually, you will be so much more efficient and effective in anything you do because your brain stops all of the back and forth. It just like isn't ever there. And so this is like the fastest way to not only a loving relationship with hunger, but a relationship with losing weight and being in a body that you love and you enjoy with a fraction of the effort and energy that you may be used to. And so again, you can do this practice with any feeling. And so I share urgent because a lot of times we think hunger creates urgency. But when you do this, when you release yourself from emotional hunger in the way I just described, by just bringing your attention and awareness to that vibration of that emotion in your body, you will see how you feel really calm and peaceful no matter how hungry you are. It almost feels like magic. And so I want you to go out and practice this yourself. And again, like I said, you can do this with any emotion. So I'm just going to give you one more example. Another emotion, a lot of times we just auto associate with hunger is justified, where we're kind of like, well, I mean, a little food, it doesn't really matter anyways. I mean, well, I'm a little hungry. That's like at least how it sounds in my brain. It's like, well, a little bit, it doesn't matter. I mean, I worked out this morning, so just a little bit. It's like a very justified feeling. And when I feel the emotion of justified, it's a contracting feeling in my chest. My shoulders come in a little bit. It feels like a sneaky vibration. And it's very concentrated in a small ball. So urgency for me feels like guitar strings going from shoulder to shoulder, whereas justified feels like a concentrated small ball. And that little ball is vibrating. And there's actually a more inward pull to the energy. And it feels like a little mouse eating in the corner, like in my chest, like that sort of feeling and vibration happening. And it's a dark blue navy color. And there's kind of a chomping texture to it. And it's a little bit of like a jittery vibration. And I actually notice when I'm feeling justified, like my fingers rub together a little bit. And so those are all of the ways that I experience the emotion of justified. And as I bring my attention and my awareness to that vibration, whereas the urgency, it felt like the guitar strings sort of started to slow down and kind of like drop off and kind of melt away. Justified to me, as I bring my attention awareness to it, it actually feels like it starts to evaporate and just kind of like leave my being altogether. And so you want to do this with any emotion that you're feeling that you have a then desire to eat from, and like eat as a way to distract yourself from. And you can do this with stress or anxious or excited. And again, like I said, the point of this is to teach your brain that you're feeling an emotion in your body and that it's not a problem. And when you do this, you release yourself from the grip of the emotion so that then it becomes so easy to distinguish between true hunger and emotional hunger. And when you are able to spot emotional hunger and release yourself from it, then you get to say, oh, am I at a physical hunger level that I want to answer? And your brain stops all of the mental back and forth trying to decide when and what and how much to eat and how do I micromanage my hunger and how do I avoid hunger and how do I force myself to be hungry? Like none of that happens. You just have a calm, loving relationship with hunger. And one of the very fascinating things that happens that I've seen time and time again for myself and also for women in the Naturally Thin for Life program is a relationship with hunger where they will tell me something like, I used to intermittent fast. That's what someone will tell me. And I used to intermittent fast too. They'll be like, I used to intermittent fast and like force myself to be hungry. And then when I finally got to like this forced level of hunger, I would feel so justified in eating that I would also overeat. And so they're like, would have this urgent justification of like, ooh, like big relief, like now I can finally eat. And then they would go to eat and they would often find themselves overeating. Or they would try to force themselves to get too hungry that then they would feel so out of control because of the urgency they associated with the hunger that then they would also overeat. And so intermittent fasting is not something I teach in my Naturally Thin for Life program. It's why we never talk about it here. But what happens is a lot of people will tell me, they're like, oh, when I have this calm, loving relationship with hunger, I notice I'm actually truly not physically hungry until like noon or midday. And they'll say to me, I used to try to force myself to not eat until then, or to, not eat until whatever time they were doing for their fasting window. But they'll tell me when I truly listen to my physical hunger, they will say, I actually might get to a similar time where I start to eat, but they're like, I didn't think about it at all until I was just hungry. And so the point of this is not for you to do intermittent fasting, but the point is for you to really truly listen to your physical hunger. And then what they will also say to me is when I have that calm, loving relationship with hunger, and maybe I don't eat until noon, and that's the first time I eat for the day, only because that's when I was actually hungry for the first time, not because I'm trying to force a fasting window, they'll say to me, it's so much easier to stop eating when I'm satisfied because I'm not trying to force myself to only eat in a particular window, but because I am truly listening to my hunger. So I just know when my hunger pops up again at the level that I want it to be at, I'll just eat. It doesn't matter whether or not it's in my window. And I'm not afraid of like forcing myself to get hungry again in the future. And I don't have an urgency to it. And so it's so much easier to stop eating when you're satisfied when you have this relationship with hunger. And the last thing I want to say about this is that a lot of times we just have auto associations or like auto triggers that we think we're hungry, but we're not actually physically hungry. We're just emotionally hungry. And so some of those like auto triggers may be certain emotions like stressed, anxious, bored, or excited. We may just like every time we feel those vibrations in our body, our brain may just be like, oh, usually you eat when you feel this way. And so it just created an auto association and just a habit that has happened. But there may also be other triggers, like physical triggers that our brain is like, oh, we're hungry now. It might be a clock trigger. So if you notice yourself eating a snack at 10 o'clock every day, I would be super curious if you asked yourself, am I truly physically hungry? Am I at the hunger level I want to be at? Do I feel really calm right now? Or do I just think I'm hungry because this is the time I eat every day based on the clock, not based on my true physical hunger? There may also be environmental kind of triggers that you start to think you're hungry when you experience them. So for some people, it's when they watch TV, or when they're in a particular store, or when they are sitting on the couch, or when they're like sitting in a chair where they often eat, right? Your brain is really good at making habits and making auto associations of things that we do over and over again so that we don't have to consciously think about them and they just like happen on repeat. Because our brain is like, oh, you keep eating every time you're in this chair, so we must want to eat every time we're in this chair, whether or not we're hungry. And so you want to be on the lookout, not just for emotional eating kind of auto associations and emotional eating habits, but also just like very obvious, like environmental ones. Like, do you eat every time at 10 o'clock? Do you eat every time you're watching the same TV show? Do you eat every time you're at the same spot on the couch? And if you do, then you want to be like, ooh, this is emotional hunger. And then ask yourself, what is the emotion I'm feeling right now? And release yourself from it. And then know that all I need to do is release myself from this emotional hunger in order to not only befriend hunger, but have a calm, loving relationship with my hunger. And before we end, I want to share something that Mindy in our program shared with us. I asked everybody, I just said, what are some of the ways you used to think about hunger and what are some of the ways you now think about hunger? So I could just share with you in their words. And so she shared with us, she said, I used to eat when I was bored or restless. And she said also, I would eat to get a certain amount of macros, a certain macro number that I was given. I would even eat just to hit those numbers, even if I wasn't hungry. And she said, now I eat when I'm hungry and I love the hungry feeling and allowing the hunger and feeling so good when I'm eating and when I'm done. She also said, I used to feel like I needed to eat dinner because I was making dinner or wanted to eat dinner, even if I wasn't hungry. She said, now I enjoy sometimes not eating dinner because I'm listening to my hunger. She said, I check in and I ask myself, am I hungry? And then I think about my future self and how I love feeling empty and light going to bed. And I truly look forward to feeling my hunger, feeling that in my body so that I get to the feeling I want to feel and that I know when to answer my hunger. And friends, this is what I want for all of you. It's not just loving your hunger in allowing yourself to get to be hungry, but loving your hunger, befriending your hunger, releasing yourself from the emotional hunger so that you understand hunger in your body so that you don't fear it and so that you also love satisfying it. And this is the fastest way there, befriending hunger, releasing yourself from emotional hunger. And then next week, we're going to talk about fully embracing and loving your hunger. And if this is something you really want to kind of master this skill, I invite you to join us in the Naturally Thin for Life program for Love Hunger Month. You will fall in love with your hunger, your relationship with hunger, knowing exactly how to satisfy your hunger. And so in the month of July, in the Naturally Thin for Life program, we are really focusing on your relationship with hunger. And so it's something you learn as part of the 5-step process in the program, but we're really honing in and focusing on it in the month of July. So head over to lauradixoncoaching.com/join and you can get all of the details there where you will learn exactly what we're doing for Love Hunger Month. And you can also see the other bonuses that you get when you join by midnight on June 30th. All right, friends. I hope you all have an amazing week. Release yourself from emotional hunger. And this isn't something you just intellectually understand. This is something you put into practice and you will have a lived experience of calm and peacefulness that might just blow your mind. Friend, if you are loving what you are learning here on the podcast, you have to come check out my Naturally Thin for Life program. It is my on-demand lifetime access program where I teach you brand new concepts not taught here on the podcast. And I will walk you through exactly how to implement all of the tools I teach you here so that they become just a part of you. You will learn exactly how to understand your specific brain and your specific body so that you become naturally thin for the rest of your life and you no longer struggle with your weight. Inside of the Naturally Thin for Life program, you can also receive live help so that you consistently make progress and reach your goal. I will teach you how to accelerate your naturally thin journey in a sustainable way so that the change becomes permanent. The best part is that it's risk-free. You either love it or I will give you your money back. If you are ready to finally be naturally thin for life, join us at lauradixoncoaching.com/work with me. That's LAURADIXON coaching.com and click on the Work With Me tab. I cannot wait to see you there.